Thank you. Welcome everybody to the Winner Circle Zoom call at 10 a.m. on Mondays. Got a very exciting show for you today. My name is Frank Crandall. I have my partners Nate Butcher, Elgin Walker, and Michael Senna, who I partner with to bring this call to you every Monday at 10 a.m. And we bring the best of the best, what we feel is added value for all of you folks, because you're special to us and we want to help you succeed. Okay, so I'm not going to waste any more time with my blabbering. I'm going to turn it over to Nate Butcher. And Nate, the show is yours.
Hey, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I'm just looking at the list of who's here, and it's you're all listing agents, but really good agents. So here's what we have. I want Doug to have all the time on this, so there's not going to be a lot of fluff. I just want to give you a brief overview. So Doug is my personal financial advisor, and he was telling me about a DST, a Delaware Statutory Trust 1031 exchange, and how I could get more listings if I was to use this tool. So I had Doug explain to me what a DST was, and it is a very good, it's a very good product. It's not for every single person, but it's for a lot of people. And we all have different tools in our toolbox to help us get more listings. So what this basically does, it allows people to sell their investment properties, use Eagle 1031 exchange, which Doug will tell you about, and not have to find a replacement property, because so many of those baby boomers or people are just letting houses sit, not even getting full rent. They don't want to fool with them anymore because they don't want to find the replacement. So I'm just going to introduce, this is Doug and Jordan, friends of mine for a long time. He has taught me the system. I've introduced it to my clients, and I hope this will benefit you guys. This is just trying to bring value as a listing agent, how to get more listings with your current database. Doug, go. Oh, one thing I will say, Doug will send you, if you want to put your email and stuff in the chat, and okay, Frank, to give that, because I know you need to do that. You're not going to get spammed or anything like that, but he will send you the material that he has so you can present that to your clients. He's really great. So without, I'd just like to introduce Doug and Jordan. Take it away.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Frank, for allowing us here to talk about DST 1031 exchange. As Nate says, I've been his financial advisor. I've been this way for about a little over 24 years now. I just want to get into the content because I know there's going to be a lot of questions. So I do have a little slide presentation I'm going to go through. Let's see if I can make this work. Give me a second.
Chris, you'll probably have to give him screen access.
You're on, dog. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's do that. And
one thing why Doug's doing this, I'll tell you really quick. I kind of prepped him on who our audience is. Because if you look, the faces on here, at least I know, I mean, there's Tam. I mean, these are experienced real estate agents. So we're not really going to talk about what a 1031 is, right? We're skipping past all of that. We're getting to what the DST, knowing what a 1031 is. Go ahead.
Correct. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nate. All right, just about there. Okay. So, all right. So here we go. I don't need to go in. The only reason I'm going to bring this up here is I'm like Nate. I'm really tenacious for our clients. Nate and I have a lot of kind of the same tendencies, want to protect and preserve. That kind of goes back to both of our prior days of law enforcement. Nate was with the LA County area. I was with San Diego PD. So we both have that same tenacity that we really want to protect and serve our clients, and we're all tenacious in that area. The product that the program I'm going to show you today, and the reason I'm showing my licenses is I got to have at least 3 licenses to be able to sell these. Now, we'll get into that. What does that mean for you and all that later? But it just shows that this is something that the SEC has approved. A lot of you are aware of tenant in commons, the problem with ticks that were back in the day. And now they have IRS approvals for what's called DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trust. It is a securitized investment. It's monitored and overseen by the SEC. So you're going to see disclosures throughout this thing. For me to even present this, like I said, I've got to have 3 different licenses to even present it. So just kind of give you a little bit of background on this. All right. So DST's 1031 exchanges. We're not going to talk a lot. I'm going to kind of skim through this. Again, this is just some of the disclosures we have to have. I'm going to quickly go through this. As Nate says, all of you know about DSTs. You know that you got to have like for like value, and we'll go into that. The kind of the multi, and one of the things we will talk about the sale prices. You know, if you got $1 million property, you got an equity of 500,000. That's a 50-50 debt ratio, debt to loan or loan to value ratio. So you've got to be able to do that exact same thing, or otherwise you deal with boot. So I'm going to kind of skip through a lot of this because this is the type of presentation I would, if your clients wanted to know it, if you don't have something, we can actually show this presentation and educate them through the whole DST process or through the whole 1031 exchange process, showing them the 45 days to identify the property and 180 days. And the reason I'm bringing this up here right now is because some of you may end up in a situation where you're getting to the tail end of your 45 days. And sometimes I've seen agents talk about their fell out of escrow, or all of a sudden they're selling the house they were going to buy or the property they were going to buy. They went to somebody else, and now the client's going to get stuck with a tax burden. So we were going to talk about that. I'm going to kind of skip through this. I'm going to get to really what a DST is. Here we go. All right. Delaware Statutory Trust is a business trust that can be used for real estate ownership of higher quality, professionally managed commercial properties. So in essence, we're bringing on institutional partners, companies you may or may not have heard of, like Cantor Fitzgerald, Blue Rock, Inland. There's a diverse group of institutional sponsors that go out and buy these properties. And what they do is they turn around and sell it to the public through the SEC, through these securitized investments. And all the due diligence is done. There's a lot of there's a big, thick PPM, the memorandum that talks about the properties. The investors are not direct owners of the real estate, but instead own an undivided interest in the assets held in the trust. So they're a very small percentage. A lot of these properties range anywhere from 80 million, 60 million, all the way up to, let's say, 150 to $200 million properties. They could be commercial, large commercial properties. One in particular is like an Amazon facility, multifamily, 350 to 450 type property, 350 to 450 unit type properties. So the trust will hold title. So the DST is the business trust. It will hold title. Everybody has interest in that. They're recognized by the IRS according to their IRS rule 2004-86, and it's a qualified replacement property for real estate. So, example, $500,000 condo sells, and they can't have a hard time finding another replacement. They can actually do a 1031 exchange into a DST, $100 million apartment complex in, let's say, Florida or Texas or anywhere across the US, because our institutional partners are all across the United States. Property types may include triple net properties. One in particular, some of you may or may not be familiar with, the Tractor Supply Store. Tractor Supply Store, a lot of times most of the times they don't even own that building. It is a DST. So I've got investors that actually own, they're partial owners of Tractor Supply stores in different parts of the country. So self-storage unit, office buildings, and many other types of properties. Even student housing. We've done some student housing in Reno. We've got some student housing actually in Clemson. There's one out that way, and really throughout the country. So DST advantages. It's a solution for exchangers. If you don't have the time, energy, or expertise to manage, let's say they're tired of, dealing with the properties, so they get access to institutional quality real estate management and financing. So they really get to just back out of the whole management of properties, and they're allowing the institution themselves to not only manage it, handle financing, handle the day-to-day operations, and they get the net proceeds of that on a monthly basis. So that's key. Some people they're like, well, how often do I get paid on this? Well, these are all monthly payouts. So they're going to continue that same monthly cash flow that they're used to with their current property. So it's passive ownership, so no property management responsibilities, diversification, non-recourse, so they're not going to be held liable if something goes wrong with the property. They can't come after them for it. Tax reporting, it's a grantor letter, so they receive their share of the depreciation of that property. So they're going to be able to get all of the same benefits of owning their individual property, even though they're on a $100 million complex. So they're still going to get all the same benefits of being a real estate investor, just on a much larger scale. Lower minimum investments, typically $100,000 1031 is the minimum. Now, some folks, I've got investors that just, they like this, and they can drop in 25, 50 grand cash into one of these. So that's the minimum on the cash side. But for a 1031, the minimum's $100,000. Estate planning flexibility. Now, this is great. This is something that I really go in depth with our clients about. This is an estate planning tool, and they kind of cock their head like a puppy dog, like, how is this an estate planning tool? And I said, look, you have a property or two properties, and you got 4 kids. How many times do all 4 kids agree to do the same thing at the same time? Especially if one thinks property is going to go up in value and 1 or 2 others don't want to do it anymore. And that's a recipe for disaster, because now there's conflict within the family on 1 or 2 properties. So what happens here is, now when somebody's tired of, let's say, managing these properties, they can do a 1031 into a DST. At their passing, their 4 heirs will get a step up in cost basis, and they'll divide up that share 4 ways. So each person gets their fair share of that 1031 that the client did. Now, and then closing with confidence. It will always close. So once everything's done, it'll just close. Typically, when I've done these 1031s, that 45-day window, I'm usually sending them, complete a document that's already done. I mean, not only did they identify it, not only did escrow close, not only did the money go to the qualified intermediary, the QI, and then it went to the new property and it closed. I can do all that in under 45 days. Within 45 days from the close of escrow. That's been pretty standard.
Hey, Doug. So,
yes.
Can you explain how clients might get higher income on their current properties going into a DST?
Yes. Thanks, Jordan. So, for example, Nate and I met with a client, and she had purchased I think it was a $300,000 condo. It's now worth $600,000, but rent was based on the $300,000. And maybe she gets a 2 or 3% escalator on the rent. And so her net income after all expenses was about 2.5%. Now, doing a 1031, she can capture the increased value of her property from $300,000 to $600,000, pay 0 tax on the exchange, and now get a 4 to 4.5, maybe even 5, depending on which property. Let's just say 4.5% dividend or income off 600,000 versus 2.5% net income. So that 4.5 is net income after all expenses are paid by the property management, the institutional property manager, and sponsor. So it's a great way to increase and double their income. For example, I had a client had 2 townhomes, 2 duplexes. Two duplexes totaled about $2 million. He was getting about $50,000 in net income after all expenses. And we took him to $120,000 a year in net income after expenses by doing a 1031 into multiple DST properties. So he went from 2 properties to about 5. And so we were able to diversify across property types and increase income. And so it worked out great for him. And he's not the only one, but that's just a real clear example. So there are some limitations. So it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? So there are some things that you got to be wary of. DSTs are illiquid. And what I mean by that is, and this is one of the reasons why these need to be accredited investors. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Jordan, remind me in case I forget.
Yep.
So the DSTs are illiquid, meaning once they are in the property, they're in it for 5 to 7 years. That's the time frame. Maximum's 10. But these DSTs, these sponsors have about a 5 to 6, 7 year time frame that they get in. They do some improvements within it, just surfacey, but enough that it allows them to increase income or increase rent, so they can increase income to the investors. And then they sell it. They got a couple ways. They can sell it to somebody new, or they can sell it to a big REIT, real estate investment trust. So let's say it's $100 million property. They go 5 to 7 years and they sell it to a REIT, typically a multi-billion dollars. Some of these are, anywhere from $4 to $8 billion REITs that they'll sell it to them. And then the client has the opportunity to either go back to you and go find other properties. We always tie you and your client together in my system. So when the time comes, we go back to you and say, hey, you might want to, this is coming due. They're maturing, they're selling out. The client has the option to do another 1031 exchange, either to a property you sell them, or if not, then we can send them on to another DST. There is no secondary markets on this. It's not like the stock market where there's secondary markets you can sell things. Investors have no control or involvement in property management. And that's one of the big keys. And it says it's a negative, but in probably some of your clients that have been doing this for multi-years, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years, and they're tired of dealing with rental properties, this may be a big positive for them, right? So the decision when it's time to sell is determined by the sponsor. This is the major difference between a DST and a TIC. And this is one of the reasons why TICs were always problematic, is you could have 100 investors and it just takes 1 or even 2 investors that think they're smarter than the average bear, that they're like, no, the property is going to go up. I've heard a lot of stories about this in about 2006, 2007. And a lot of people got burnt with that because these guys, oh, it's going to keep going up, going up, going up. And then 2008 hit. Well, that's been removed. And now the sponsor has the sole discretion on when to sell. And because they're in the markets and they're dealing in all these different sectors and all these other institutions and REITs, and they really have their pulse on the market, and they're really going to make the right decision for the clients. So when a DST is sold, the investor can, as I mentioned, roll it over into another DST, go to a new property you have for them, or they can cash it out and pay the taxes if they want. And then some of the fees may be a little higher and it's just based on the DSTs. And we usually scrutinize those pretty heavily to make sure that they're low cost as we can keep it. We've got some DSTs that are zero leverage, so there's no loans on them. There's 100% cash deals. Tractor Supply Store was a great example of that. That was an all cash deal. So if clients have properties that they have no mortgage on them or anything, and it's 100% paid for, well, now they can avoid all the taxes and go into another property that has no leverage either. And it's just a great deal for them. All right. So these 7 deadly sins are really more for the sponsor, but it's stuff just to be aware of. So exchanging DST property for another property. So let me back up. The beneficial interest to qualify as direct interest for real estate for a 1031, the DST must be limited in its action and may not exchange property for another. So they can't go in and start playing the property investment game. Investing cash between distribution dates other than short-term securities. And the reason for this, they don't want the sponsors to take it, go invest it somewhere saying, oh, we're going to earn you more money on it. It's keep it short-term securities because they have to go back to the investors. So all that to get this tax benefit, all of that money has to get passed back to the investors. So they can't accept additional capital. So once it closes, once they said, hey, we're raising $100 million for this property, once they've raised all of that, that's done. They can't ask the investor, your client, for more money. They can't go raise more money. What's some of the problems with startup companies in Silicon Valley is they raise capital and then they don't get it done and then they raise capital again, right? So what happens to the original investor? his shares are now diluted because now they raised a second rounding or second round or third round of funding, and it keeps diluting their shares. This one says, nope, once you close out the $100 million property, it's done. You can't add more money to it. So you have to make it work. And so there's pro forma figures in all of these DSTs. So in the memorandum, the big old booklet, it'll actually show exactly what they're expected, because they already know what the expenses are. They already know what the income is. So what their goal is, they may buy a Class A property that is maybe 85%, leased. So their goal is to get it to 95%. Well, they already know what those expenses are. They already know, they know certain things. So they're able to actually build out a pro forma to show you how the cash flow is going to work in that investment. So the client knows upfront how that cash flow is going to work and what the loan is on it and all of that. So they can't renegotiate any of the financing on that property. They can't renegotiate any leases. So they can't enter into new leases. So they can make repairs or improvements. So they can't do structural changes. So let's say you get $100 million apartment complex or property, and let's say there's 5 buildings, and you look at it and you're like, you know what? There's an area we can actually do a 6th building. You can't do that. That's a structural change. All they can do is minor repairs and improvements, basically facelift. They can change out appliances. They can do some other things that really help, make the curb appeal, so to speak, more attractive to other renters that may be in the area. All right. So, this is just some more disclosures. So no guarantee of success, and investors could incur. These are all kind of the typical, what the SEC wants us to put in there. There's no public market. Highly unlikely such a market will ever develop. Substantial restrictions on the DST. We talked about some of this stuff. There's no specific time or specified time that properties will be liquidated. They usually go as 5 to 7 years. And Delaware statutory trusts, relatively new vehicles, again, since about 2004, but we've seen them perform pretty well. From what we've seen, the selling and the moving from one property to the next has been made a lot easier because now the sponsor controls this, not the individual owners or the investors that are in it. Investors have no voting rights and have no control over the management. I don't think they wanted it anyway, or otherwise they wouldn't be here. They control it themselves. Growth, it says there's no guarantee investor will receive any return. So they could just, if real estate goes south and they're able to sell it and there was no growth, a lot of these have some guarantees, and the guarantees are only good as what the market can provide, right? So we just have to look at that and see what they're providing. Again, performance of the DSTs will depend on the tenant's ability to pay rent. Now, a lot of the ones we were in, these are typically the ones we have stuck with have been Class A type properties. And what I mean, you all know what kind of Class A is. These are the apartment complexes and other types of properties. But the apartment complex in particular had, Olympic-sized pools, or 2 or 3 of them on the property. They have LA Fitness-style gyms in them, and the movie theaters in them. And a lot of them are the high-end professionals that are renting, not necessarily wanting to buy a house, but they're renting in these really nice resort-style apartment complexes. And during COVID, those all held up extremely well. Really no issues. I mean, some of them may had dividends reduced a little bit for that time period, and only a few that I saw. And then they were back up again once they came out of COVID. So that all worked well. So
one point. So your clients will get the monthly rent, during the time that they are in the DST. And then once the DST, we use the phrase comes full cycle, right? So they raise capital, they work on the property, and at the end, when they sell it, your clients will get the appreciation of that property as well. So it's both types, the monthly income plus any future growth of that property, 5, 7 or more years, in the future.
Yeah, typically, I think IRS limits them to maximum of 10 years, but their goal is to keep it from reaching that 10th year. They're that 5 to 7 years, and we're seeing that come through. So you're probably thinking, let me just whip through these. These are all, again, other disclosures. So before I go to the questions, here's something that I want to just kind of point out real quick, because some of you are sitting there going, how is this going to help me? Well, let me explain. There's 4 scenarios that we have experienced, and 4 scenarios we have seen. It's called flawless, leftovers, backup, and kicking the can down the road. So let me talk about flawless. The flawless one is you can go in and you can do your own 1031. Some of you have probably already done it before and probably done it many times over. It looks like there's a lot of experience here on this webinar. So you go in, you sell the property, you help the client find a replacement, and everything closes just fine. And it's great. You got both sides of that transaction for the client. Great. You're moving forward. Now, there's another one where it's called leftovers. So you help them sell the assets, but you're unable to place 100% of the equity into a replacement property. So let's say you have $1 million property and you're only able to place, let's say 900,000 or even 800,000. Then during that 45 days, you identified one and you're like, hey, there's some leftover here. And the client doesn't want to pay the taxes on that boot. Let's say it's 100,000, which is the minimum. So you got 100,000 left over. Well, you can contact us, Jordan or myself, and we can identify some properties. I got a laundry list. I've probably got on my platform right now about probably over 25 different types of properties all across the country that we have access to on these institutions. So you contact us and say, hey, I got this client. We got 900,000 we can place somewhere. We got 100,000 left over. Client doesn't want to pay the tax. Well, during that 45-day, you can identify one of the properties that are on our list. And now your client gets to do 900,000 with you. And then the extra leftover of 100,000 can go over to the DST that we handle. So we're the real estate agent on that side of it, because again, I've got 3 licenses that I'm the only way that I'm the one that's got to do that. But you keep the client from paying any tax and you get both sides of that transaction. Here's another one. What if that same $1 million client identified a property for $1 million and you're in this 45-day? Well, what do college kids do when they're applying for colleges, right? They've got their list of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They got their top 2, but they also fill out, do one for 3 and 4. Right? That's their backup plan in case they can't get into the top 2 choices. Well, do the same thing here, right? Because what happens if you get to the end of that 45 days and the seller for the property you're trying to buy backs out of the deal? I think people have gone through that scenario before. Well, because during the 45-day, you identified some backups from our list of properties. You can list as many as you want, but if they back out, now you're left with $1 million they're going to pay tax on. Well, now you've got the backup plan. So with us, we can give you some properties. It's all listed out in that 45 days. You still get to close the deal. The client still gets to do a 1031. Unfortunately, the one that you were working with backed out, but now we can do all that $1 million into the DST. So that's the backup plan, or what they call safety school. And then the last one is kicking the can down the road. And this is where Nate and other agents are starting to get some traction, because you've got all of you have a Rolodex of clients. If there's 15, I think there's 25, according to Frank. I think there's 25 people on this list. We'll back Jordan and I out of this, so you're about 23. Everybody's probably got somewhere between 500 and 800 clients. And now you've got your Rolodex of clients that have owned properties for years, and they can't convince them to sell it because they don't want to deal with, going through the 1031. They like the client. They have their list of handymen and plumbers and all this, and it just works. So what they'll do is they'll tell you, hey, send me a list of what's available and I'll get back to you. How many of those have really ever panned out? Not a lot of them. Maybe some have. I'm not going to say never say never, right? But they're not interested in doing it right now. But you also know, hey, they're getting up there in age, and they may have some kids that, because they're long-term clients of yours, may not get along. Back to that estate planning scenario. So you can approach them and say, hey, look, I know you're getting up there. You may not want to do this anymore, but you don't want to go through the exchange. We can actually help you close out. We can get you moved into an institutional property. It'll be an estate planning tool. because they're going to sell their individual property, get into a DST, and now the client has estate planning protection for their kids. They get to increase their income because now they're capitalizing on the increased value of their property, and they're increasing the net payout, and it's going to be no tax on the transaction. And now they're going to get the start the depreciation all over again with the new property, which means drastically reduced no taxes on the income. And then you show them all of that, and now they're ready to go. And now you get a new listing that you may not have been able to get before. So those 4 scenarios: flawless, leftovers, the backup plan, and the kicking the can down the road. Those are the 4 scenarios that most of you will run across. And knowing that the DSTs are here and Jordan and I are able to come alongside you and help you with your clients to get that listing and to get that sale. So that's what I wanted to end with there.
Doug, that was great. If it's okay, I want to read you a really good question from one of the top agents for over 20 years in Santa Clarita. Tammy's here. And can you just explain, and you did this very well when we had the in-person meeting with a few people, the difference in a DST and a REIT?
And a REIT. Okay, great. So a REIT, real estate investment trust, has, let's say, hundreds of these $100 million properties, right? So it's a publicly traded REIT. Shares are out there every day on the open market. Okay. So you can buy and sell that as often as you want. Now, some are not publicly traded, some are. The DST is unique in that you're getting in essence, on the ground floor. A lot of these contractors will develop the properties and then sell it to the institutional sponsor. And it may be a $70 million complex that they buy for $65 million because the contractor wants out. And now you're kind of in on the ground floor in essence, because now you get an institutional partner that's going to help build value, add value, build out that property, increase rents, which increases monthly cash flow. And then they can sell that to another institutional partner, or they'll sell it to a REIT, which I mentioned. So now that $5 billion REIT will add another $100 million property to their platform. So the investor in this gets the increase, gets the income, and gets the increased value, because maybe that $70 million property may sell for $90 million in 5 years, or $100 million. I mean, some of these have shown to have double-digit returns in anywhere from 14 and up in about 5 years, because they're able to go in and do that. I hope that answers, but it's basically, it's like someone say, hey, you're going into the mothership, right? Taking one property, adding it to an investment platform that has maybe 100 of these types of properties. So
Doug, that was good. And I think one of the things that you really wanted to hit is when you pick at your DST, you're on title as the owner of that property, of that one specific DST. And that's what you and I talked about. So where a REIT, you'd be in with a bunch of different properties. This one, you are actually on title on that property.
Yeah, the trust is on the DST is the trust. You have undivided shares. So you're one of the shareholders of that. That's why it's called a grantor letter. Yeah.
Right. So we have one more question. I'll just read it here. And it says, what is the average DST, return or dividend per year? And Doug, I think when you and I talked about, you can't say exactly on every one, but they run between, 4 to 5% is typically what you're seeing. Is that right?
Correct. And that's net income after all expenses are paid by the institution, the property management firm on that.
Yeah, and that's just the dividend income, not the total return of that property.
Correct.
And that we won't know that until that is sold in the future, obviously, for a future price.
So the few clients that I've had do it, and I'll give you a couple different scenarios just to help you guys the way they've helped me, is basically I've had a couple of clients who own these properties. They have them leased out. They've got expenses. They've got handyman. They're getting up there, their baby boomer age. And they're like, wow, I would love to be able to just get rid of all this headache and still be in the game, but I just don't want to take the energy to go buy another property and more tenants. So they're just kind of letting the property sit there. So I was able to say, hey, let's list this property, put it in the DST. You get the dividend, which is actually more than what you're really getting in rent by the time you take away the expenses. Then you're still getting the equity growth off of the bigger property, right? So it's just like, and you don't have the headache. And what a wonderful thing. Your kids don't have to fight over the way that you divide it up and you leave it. So that seems to be the people who, for me, are I think you called those ones kicking the can down the road. Sell their cans, put them in a bigger can, and then we could at least get the listing side. I have another lady, her husband passed away. She has two investment properties, really large ones. One's in Stevens Ranch, about 1.7. And she's like, Nate, I can't handle these tenants anymore. They're driving me crazy, but I don't want to pay taxes on $1.7 million. It's paid off cash. So if we take that sell that 1031 into a DST, she gets an income off of it. And then she still gets the value because she's younger and things like that. So it's really helped me a lot. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, great. That's a great explanation, Nate.
And Doug, can you go over the accredited investor so that the agents know what type of client this would be suitable for?
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Jordan. Correct. So accredited, it's their net worth. We always say have investments of more than $1 million or more. And this is excluding their primary residence where they're living. So if they've got, let's say they've got, two $500,000 properties, well, that's $1 million. They're all paid off, right? They're all paid off. Then there's $1 million because they probably have other investments in the bank, like CDs or investments, cash, stocks, bonds, and all of that. So as long as they have $1 million or more outside of their primary residence, then they're quality. They're what's called accredited investor, and they qualify for this platform. It's not for somebody that has, a $500,000 property and really no other investments. That's their only investment. It's not for them. This is why they want accredited investors, because it is an illiquid it is an illiquid investment. Remember, I said the goal is to sell it and do something within 5 to 7 years, where the investor has the option to either do another 1031 or cash out, or where you can then sell them another property, which would be another 1031. So this is why accredited investors, they don't want all their money tied up into this, because it is illiquid. So
yeah, that is an IRS definition. That's not set by us or the sponsor. That's set by the IRS because they want to protect your clients.
Correct. And there's all kinds of filings. So I've seen. Unfortunately, I've been on the wrong side, or a couple of my clients have been on the wrong side of these real estate situations where a group of investors went into the properties and now they can't get their money out, or they're having issues with it. The seller, the operating agreement just wasn't in their best interest, and all of that. So one of the things that's nice with DSTs is the SEC has really, and the IRS have really set guidelines to protect your clients, so that, and that's why they say, look, you can't, take on new loans. You can't, do all the illegal, or the 7 deadly sins I mentioned earlier. Those are all client investor protection things that they have in there, so that the clients know exactly what they're getting. They know exactly what's going to happen. And there's a time frame set on this, and it can't go to infinity. So, it's good for your clients to have the SEC oversee all of this stuff. So it is a protection in a sense for you guys.
So Doug, Jordan, we have one more really good question here. What, if any, what is the upfront cost? And the second part of the question, what is the upfront cost? And is there any annual maintenance cost once you're in the DST?
Zero, no upfront cost. Once you do your net proceeds worksheet on your clients, and you know how much equity the client will walk away with, every dollar of that goes into the DST. So no upfront costs and no annual fees. All of those are built into the proceeds worksheet by the sponsor.
Great.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes. So regarding necessary maintenance and repairs to properties, my brain is going to, okay, so what if there's substantial damage to a property via, let's say, a termite infestation that wasn't caught, that created a structural issue, or tornadoes blow through? How is all of that handled?
Yeah, no, great question. So maintenance costs. so let's go back. These institutional managers really good at what they do. So could that happen? It could. There is a reserve. So when there's always a reserve set aside for situations like that. And it changes from property to property, depending on which property it is and what's going on. Tornadoes, all of that, there's insurance built in for all of that. And as you might imagine, everybody's dealing with the increase of insurance costs. So some of that has changed kind of how they look at some of the numbers, but everything is managed through the cash flow of the property. So, and you can see the pro forma that's built in. They'll do a 10-year, 7 to 10 year, what they expect rents to be, maybe the facelift and some of the things they're going to do to bring value to the property so they can increase rent. So you'll see that in those performance sheets as well. So a lot of that is already covered, and there's a lot of insurance that will cover a lot of that as well.
Yeah, and the sponsor has their budget that your clients will see on day one, right? And that has these expenditures built in. And then many times what we have seen is that clients get what's called a 13th check, right? So you'll get your monthly income, right? And then at the end of the year, if there's excess cash in the fund that they did not pay out for those reasons, your clients get their portion of those excess.
Yep. And some of those have been quite substantial in the last year or two. So it's been really neat.
Okay, you guys, we're coming up on our time limit. If any of you want more information, please take a picture of this screenshot we got here for Doug's, all of his information. Wow, Doug and Jordan, you guys are full of info. I got a really crazy question here. For all of us that are working our database, and yes, I still do emails. It's so 1980s. And I'd like to use this as part of a touch. Is there any way we could get a flyer that we could customize to us so we could send out as part of our 31 or 33 touch? Do you have something like that, or will we create that?
Yeah, no, Frank, that's great. Yes, again, I'm on close to the finish line. I'm hoping to have something this week. Again, with all the SEC regulations, you noticed all my disclosures. So I've got to have all these things massively disclosed. So one of the things, I do have some pre-approved, just basic flyers on some of this that if you just put your email in, that's fine. And then I have 3 separate flyers I've worked on that just got completed on their branding, and they're going through my compliance. I'm hoping should be done by the end of the week, that I can send you, that you can now forward to your clients. What are DSTs? What's a 1031 exchange? We haven't even talked about, because it's very complex, but opportunity zones, right? Where they go into these low economic communities and they redevelop it. And there's some tax breaks for clients to go into that. So we've got all of those. I'm hoping will be done soon. I'm getting those out. And then I can send, if you send the email, I'll send you the first flyer that we have for you. And then those emails I'll take and send you out the 3, and I'll show you, here's one that goes directly to the client to explain a DST. Here it is for a 1031 exchange. That way, if you got them, give them the flyer on what a 1031 is, you get to educate them through our flyer. And they're like, hey, let's go talk to those guys and let's talk about a DST and a 1031. And then we can start working together that way. So
it's all about networking and getting more business. This is fantastic. I'd love for you guys to do another repeat performance down the road. You guys are super knowledgeable. I had no idea about this stuff. And Nate, thank you for bringing this to light.
Yes. Thank you, Nate.
Yeah. And if you want to do a private showing with your clients, we're free for that. We can get something scheduled. My assistant Karen can book something, and we can do one of these for your clients if you want. And if you're in the Santa Clarita area, I've got a big conference room that you can bring them to if you want. So there's lots of options.
All right, everybody. Thank you for attending. We had very few drop-offs, which is great. And this was very interesting and very relevant. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again.
Look forward to it. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.